All right, welcome to week 3 of the Air Transportation System seminar course. And we're in the literature review process. So I just wanted to touch base. If we go to course content here in the Blackboard course here and go to week 3, you should be able to see a few things here. This is pre-video recording, so we've only got a few files up here. And I'm basing my lecture on lecture 2 here, the research process. We already talked about the broad problem area and defining the problem statement in terms of the topic. We'll go into the problem statement a little bit more in the next lecture, but now that we have a few topics that we want to explore, what we want to do is start the literature review. And so right where I'm at is this number 3 element here all the way down to evaluating the articles, and that's where we're at. Before we define the problem statement, what we need to do is we've looked at the overall topic last week. We've looked at some of the options, hopefully, that you might be interested in researching in terms of the content, the purpose, what it might be useful for in terms of the implications in the aviation industry. Now what we want to do is really narrow down which topic we really want to do and start working towards defining the problem statement. And so we need to do a literature review and kind of explore why we want to do what we want to do. So with the 3 topics that I asked you to really think about, I'd like you to choose potentially 1 or 2 of them depending on how your literature review goes. And so really will boil down to 1, but you can be doing a literature review for 1, 2, or 3 of them and see which one really comes out with the most beneficial literature review. And sometimes you might find yourself changing your mind with your broad topic before you go into the problem statement. So our goal here is to narrow down your field of interest and narrow down what you're going to be researching by using the literature review to help you define your problem, define what your topic's really going to be in terms of a problem that you're trying to solve rather than just a broad topic. So let me go over the lecture and then we'll do some examples of how you would approach this, right? So the purpose of a literature review is to, first of all, kind of explore what's out there and provide a foundation. What we're doing is searching different sources in a step-by-step fashion to identify what's already out there, both published or unpublished in some cases, um, based off the topic of interest that you have. So let's say the overall topic that I'm looking for is drones. The overall topic is drones in the aviation industry and how we're going to look at pilots using these drones, right? So by defining the broad topic, now I want to see what's out there with respect to drones. Maybe I have some ideas that are associated with drones. Now that I have some maybe topics that I've talked to with other people, and I want to define it in a little bit more detail. So by looking at literature review, it will help me define very important variables. So maybe there's research done already on drones, but there are some variables that are missing or variables that were considered, but you want to explore it a little bit more. So in this case, let's say I want to say I'm finding out, or I've heard, or I've read an article or something on the news was saying about, how drone pilots are unsafe. Well, how can I make drone pilots safe? Well, training, right? Well, maybe I want to use something like a simulator, have people go through drone simulations or using a simulator to fly drones first before they actually fly real drones. And that really gives me an idea of, okay, what are some variables I want to look at? Am I looking at the type of simulation, time? What are the variables that are looked at already in terms of the broad topic of simulation and drones, and then see if there's anything that I can link there. So keeping all those examples I'm just giving you in mind, we'll go into it in a little bit more detail using that example of unmanned aerial systems and how that could maybe affect the aviation industry and looking at pilots and things like that. All right, so what are the key elements to a good literature review? So you want to ensure important variables that might be influencing the study are not left out. So let's say I just had the idea of drones and how pilots are, the typical drone pilot are seen as bad pilots. They don't know the rules, the regulations, or how to fly the drone. There's a lot of drone crashes from commercial use drones that you can buy off the shelf. Okay, well, I want to study, let's say, well, how can I resolve this problem? I'm brainstorming here. Well, the idea might be I want to look at simulation, right? I want to see if simulators can be used some way to train these pilots to be better. Well, if I want to see what the influence of simulators are, well, what variables do I want to explore? Do I want to look at any relationships with respect to gender? Do I want to look at relationships with respect to previous pilot experience, gaming experience? Maybe there's other things that might be factors that other people have looked at in different studies, maybe not related to aviation, maybe nursing. You could see that maybe simulators are used for nursing. Maybe the military has done things with virtual reality or things like that are some of the things you want to look at in terms of literature review, past variables that you want to look at, right? And how you want to investigate it to solve the problem that you're looking at. Then you want to use any of the previous research as a development tool for theoretical framework and hypotheses for examination. We're going to talk about theoretical framework and hypotheses in a little bit more detail, but maybe you'll come across some hypotheses or theories that are out there that are used to solve other problems like the drone example that I'm giving you. So there might be a theory that, let's see, a cognitive theory that simulation does not provide enough mental stimulation. That could be a cognitive theory called the let's say the Marx theory of simulation ineffectiveness, right? And I'm making that one up. I haven't thought of any real theoretical framework that's out there, but in terms of simulation specifically, but there's probably some research associated with theoretical frameworks, name theories that are associated with cognitive um, behavior. One that I know is cognitive dissonance. There's the theory of cognitive dissonance. If it's something completely new, you're going to have some trouble cognitively understanding the concepts, and it's not going to accept well into your cognitive framework in your head, your current knowledge, and so it's going to be hard for people to accept. So let's say your cognitive theory that if the cognitive dissonance is low, like they don't have as much dissonance because they've been exposure. So there's probably a technical term for cognitive exposure to simulations. If they're exposed more to virtual reality or simulators, they will be better equipped to perform or to do well in a simulated environment. So things like that. You want to look at some of the theoretical frameworks and theories that are out there with the literature review in the past, with the hypotheses that maybe have been come up with the other ones too, to see if it will match with your studies. So let's say there's a study out there that they've done medical doctors using simulators for surgeries, and the hypothesis is that if they're trained with using simulators, they'll perform better in real life compared to if they didn't use those simulators, or if they were trained in a real life setting using mock-up models. Um, so in a simulator, you might be able to mimic different things, different scenarios faster or more realistic than you would in a mock clay model or something like that, or plastic model, right? So you want to use those hypotheses and formulate them in your own way for an aviation format. This also adds the clarity to your problem statement. You can see the problem statement or purpose of the study is to examine the effectiveness of simulations compared to non-simulated environments for a technical field, right? That could be used in your study for this example that I'm running with in this particular scenario with the drones and simulators and pilots, right? So the previous literature, previous studies can help you mimic how you want to use your design for your study, right? And also, furthermore, relating to that topic, is that testability and replicability of the findings. So if you're just kind of making it up as you go along and you haven't looked at what other people have done, your validity and reliability might be a little bit lower than using a previous example that provided um, studies and results that could be replicated in the format that you need for the aviation side of things. So let's say again you've got that medical field that did a simulated study, simulators, and they've said, okay, we're using a simulator right now, and we've taken two groups of doctors. One set of doctors, let's say there's 100 doctors. 50 of them are going to be given the new simulation that for a heart surgery performance, right? And they've never done it before. And then we've got another 50, and they're going to be given the plastic models and a theoretical framework given by a lecturer, right? Instead of the simulator. And then they're going to compare the two groups and say, okay, one group's going to do the simulation, virtual reality simulation with a given scenario. We're going to give them the full training, and then we're going to actually have them do measure their performance in heart surgeries. And maybe they find a way to measure the two groups and see who performs better in terms of success rates, in terms of time to succeed or time to complete a heart surgery, right? And you might look at it as how long did it take them to finish their first heart surgery and complete it successfully. And the group that got the simulated virtual reality scenario, I'm making a hypothetical set of results. Let's say they got done in an average of 3 hours, right? Versus the group that was given the lecture method with plastic models of the heart surgery and not quite the hands-on experience as the virtual reality scenario. And their average time, they look at all those doctors and they find out when they do their first surgery after the study or the research or the scenario, and then they find out that the average time it takes them to complete the heart surgery is, let's say, about 5 to 6 hours, right? So 5.5 hours, for example. So we compare the two groups and see, which group got a better result than the other. And if we say, okay, the virtual reality group, the way they designed the study and they measured everything and all that, it's 3 hours versus 5.5 hours. So that's replicable in the sense that you could do the same thing in your virtual reality or simulator for drone pilots and see if the two groups will perform better given another mission or a real life mission, and see what the time it takes for them to complete that mission after the simulated study or simulator study. So that's, utilizing previous knowledge to see if you can reuse that test standards or test model and replicate it for your own study. You also avoid the risk of reinventing the wheel over here, right? So if someone's already done exactly your study, you don't really want to redo the study unless the purpose of your study is to examine the reliability of a previous study and see if it's replicable and you get the same results, right? And there are reasons for doing that. In some cases, you do want to replicate the study in the sense of if you do want to replicate and say, okay, this study may have not been so strong, there may not have been enough participants, so we're going to redo the same exact study but with larger groups. That might be a good reason to see if it's a reliable study in terms of validity. Is it truly giving me the right answer? Let's say back to the example of the doctors, right? You've got two groups, 50 and 50, right? And you looked at the study and you said, wait, they're all in the same school. They may have had the same teachers. And maybe that's why the results are like that in that sense. Maybe that 3 hours to 5.5 hours is really not that large of a difference. It's not just large enough of a variation, right? So you want to say, okay, I want to take two a bunch of sets, right? So two schools, each school 50, 50, or 100 and 100 for each group. So you have four groups from two different schools to try and replicate the study and then see the time it takes. And if it does provide the same results, 3 hours and 6 hours, let's say, difference-wise between all those four groups, the same method, the measuring the simulated group versus the non-simulated group, then you can say, okay, that was you know, a valid study and valid results. But if you're really trying to come up with something more novel, something more that can be influenced for your industry that you can research, you don't want to reinvent the wheel in that sense. In most cases. So doing a literature review really helps you see what's really out there already and whether you should do it or not, you know what I mean? Or maybe you want to investigate ways to alter your study plan or alter your idea based off what's already out there. So you want to see if it's relevant. So if you're trying to solve a problem, is it going to be perceived by the scientific community as relevant and significant? If it's been done 100 times already, if you're going to be the 101st person doing the same study over again or the same idea over again, it's not going to be as well accepted in the scientific community because it's already been done. So you want to do that. So how do I conduct a literature review? So now that we understand the reasons why we want to do the literature review, what are the main elements of conducting one? So I like to look at a top-down method. So looking at the high level and working towards a specific. So I want to see ideas, just generic ideas, and then kind of building upon that. But before I go into that method, I need to see where am I going to look at things and sources, right? So in terms of high level and working towards a specific, that's the first step. I want to say, okay, what am I going to research? I'm just going to basically research the overall topic, right? Then kind of start looking at the variables that I might want to look at. So for example, back to the drone research that I was thinking about here, simulators and their effect, right? But really, it's going to be too specific to say I'm going to Google search or Scholar search drones on pilots and simulators and the effect of it and all that. So maybe your topic's a little too specific. So you want to start off broad, top level. So I'm just going to search for example, simulator effectiveness, right? And then see what pops up and then start searching a little bit more specific. Simulator effectiveness on performance. Then I want to say simulator effectiveness in the medical field on performance, on surgery, and then start building that, building that, and building that, and start collecting that information and seeing what's out there. So we have different listing of sources. These are, you know, the best ones are the peer-reviewed journals. So you want to find journal articles that are in a peer-reviewed or peer-refereed system. What that means is these scientific journals, researchers submit their work to that journal. So let's say I've submitted before to the International Journal of Aviation Sustainability for some of the research I've done in the past. And what happens is my article would be sent out to a group, 5 to 10 subject matter experts in the field that have been selected or have volunteered to be journal reviewers, right? So most of the academic fields, one of the requirements that we need to be doing to advance our careers is to be journal reviewers as well. And so my article would be sent anonymously to them without my name or any sort of identifying details so that they don't know it's me, so they can't get any bias in that sense. And they just review it in terms of the methodology, the hypotheses that I postulate, the literature review that I've done, the methodology and data analysis, data collection, and the results that I infer and write up. They will review it on the basis of that, grade it, that sort of thing, and say whether it's good, bad, not worth looking at, whether it's worth publishing, and then kind of giving critiques on how to make it better in that sense in terms of the writing or anything along those lines. The ones who get selected and get through the process are peer-reviewed. They are good sources of science because now not only is it just some random person, some random academic, or some random person that says, all right, I'm going to just write up this scientific article. I'm going to call it a scientific article on simulators and its effectiveness, but it's not been looked at by other people in that field who can give feedback or their own opinion regarding that, then it's not as good, right? So having that peer-reviewed journal is the top level of a literature review. Then there's conference proceedings. Those are good too because usually they won't get published unless there's been some sort of review process with respect to the conference paper. Then there's reports, books, textbooks, thesis, dissertations, and then the lowest, weakest ones are newspapers or our magazines or websites. Those aren't really as robust in terms of the scientific level of research and science as peer-reviewed journals. So that's the hierarchical listing. So you really want to focus on really the first 2, 3 if they're scientific reports as well. And I'll show you how I would approach that. So, and then what you could do is within that journal, there's some sources as well there, the literature reviews from them, and you can just build upon it from there and just continuously grow from that. You can have many journal articles within a short period of time. And really the two main sources that I look at is either the library, and UAA has the library you can search and utilize that and gives you access to journals and various databases. And what's nice about being in a scholarly setting like a university, you have access to these journals usually for free. The library subscribes to these journals and pays for them, and that's part of your tuition in that sense. And if you weren't part of the UAA library system, most of the time you can't get access to these journals. You can in some cases in Google Scholar, there are ways to access the PDF files, but some of these PDF articles are not accessible unless you have a university system to locate it through. I like the Google Scholar search first, and then I use my library access with whatever university I'm associated with to gain those articles. So then what you want to do is evaluate the articles, and this is just a little piece of advice. This is what I've done in the past. You create a folder on your desktop just so that you can start saving these PDF files so that you have that source already in with you, right? And you save all the articles, typically relabel the article with the last name and then the year and a title if you want to give it that, that'd be good too. But if you're just evaluating a set of articles with, for example, the simulator exercise, you could just call the folder simulator research and then just save it all to that. You don't need to rename the title unless you wanted to. It just depends on your system. But all those articles are going to be associated with your simulator research study. After you save all the files that you think you're going to really read the abstracts and then choose the best articles. You don't need to print them out per se anymore. You can just read the articles on your computer and basically pull out the details, make notes and edits on a different Word file. What I've done is I've created a Word document in your course content here. If you go to the assignment template, what I've done is I've actually created one where you can examine the document in a little bit more detail or a little bit more methodology to the review. And so what you want to do is just read the article and start filling out what's the purpose of the literature that you did, the groups that was studied, the methods that was used in that group, in that study, the overall results, and then how is it linked to the study that you're interested in. And I'll go over this in a little bit later down the line here. But let's continue with our topic here. So read the article in a separate Word document. Other than the assignment template that I gave you, you might want to give it a little bit more detail or use the template and give as much detail as you can in terms of each of those elements, right? And what you want to really do is go into more detail with the specific elements of the methods or the results in terms of the page of the article. That would really help you out down the line when you're trying to refer to things. But for the time being, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to look at for this course about 3 to 4 journal articles associated with your topic that you finally choose. So I'm going to give it a little bit more broad element. I'm going to let you research between the 3 topics, which one gives you the best sets of results and gives you a better idea of your future next few weeks of how you want to pursue the topic, right? You've got 3 different topics potentially, and so you've got to narrow it down to one. So doing the literature review will hopefully help you figure out, this is either not enough research that I can find that I can utilize to kind of utilize how I'm going to do my approach to testability and replicability, or coming up with my theoretical framework or hypotheses for examination. Or you might find a topic that you're like, wow, there's a lot of information here that I could utilize and relate to. So let's go into the example here. If I Google library UAA and go to the library link that's associated with UAA, and what I like to do is find journal titles associated with that search. Oh, that's actual journal. Sorry, excuse me. Actually, I've done this already before. So find books and articles. That's what I want to do, is get to this link where it's find books and articles, and then I can search on it. The other way is to go to Google Scholar and just kind of basically start from there. And like I said, I wanted to look at virtual reality or simulators and their effectiveness. So the first step would be to kind of just start with that. And I kind of started that already. Simulator training versus hands-on, right? That's what I was kind of thinking about. And I look through that and I say to myself, all right, effectiveness of intermediate fidelity simulation training technology in undergraduate nursing education. That's kind of interesting. So let's open that document, see if it's worth continuing the rabbit hole in terms of that. If I read the abstract, what was the aim? The aim of the paper is to present the results of a study designed to determine the effect of scenario-based simulation training on nurses, students' clinical skills and competence. Ooh, that's starting to get really close to what I'd want, right? I want to see papers that have a similar overall topic of the effect of simulation training on performance, right? Whether it's going to make them better or not. And this is actually kind of nice. The abstract kind of helps me out there with my first set of steps in terms of the literature review before I go into a full-blown literature review and really write it all out. And so I can see the methods, how many students were involved, 99 students here. They were exposed. The experimental group were exposed to simulation training, whereas the other one was just following normal curriculum. The results, the control and experimental groups improved their performance on the second objective, clinical examination. It was significantly different. However, students' perception of stress and confidence measured on 5-point are similar between the groups for the control group and the experimental group. So what's the conclusion? All right, what does all that really mean? Simulation is a useful training technique. It helps students practice in a safe and controlled environment. This type of training is very valuable to equip students with a minimum of technical and non-technical skills before they use them in practice settings. So I really want to research that results a little bit more. So I want to keep this and actually read it later and kind of use that as one of my articles for my study. So let me see if I can download this, and this one is paid, right? So what I want to next see is if I can copy this and go to my university's library and see if that's available to me. And log in. And that's why we want to log in. And now I have full access. Should have full access, hopefully. There you go. Once you've logged in, we've got access to that database, and you can kind of read it, the full text associated with that. And you want to keep that, so I'd download it and save it as a folder, or just be aware of where I can access it so that I can read it later and refer to it in my full literature review, my full-blown literature review. And so with that, I can use that as one of them, and I'll continue, right? So we did that. I'll go back to Google Scholar, see if there's anything here. This is more medical stuff, right? So perception training, exercise pressure towards simulation training. So this is just seeing whether they like training or not, right? Let's see my next one. Well, I would expand on that. Simulation training, pilot performance, right? Just as a whole. And that might be a little bit more specific or too specific, so we might have to regress back and take out pilot performance. But right here, research of physiological factors affecting pilot performance in simulating training devices. So this is probably a separate topic, not quite what we want, in the sense that they're looking at what physiological factors like kinesthetics or sound or things like that that might affect pilot performance in a simulating training device. So it's not quite what we're looking for. So let's keep on going down. So it's picking up that the word pilot is this one looks pretty good. Excellence in performance and stress reduction during 2 different full-scale simulated training courses. This is something you might want to look at, because it might look at 2 different types of simulated training to see if there's differences in performance and stress reduction. Here you go. Impact on web-based interactive simulation game on students' experience and performance in life support training. That's a good one too. That's showing that you know, what's the simulation game doing with respect to students' experience and performance in life support training. So that's a pretty good one. So let's open that up. And we have access to it, and probably do. If not, we do the same thing. Just make sure we can get it from our library. There you go, we got the full study, right? So you get the idea. This is how we start doing it in terms of kind of getting the idea of linking. The key is linking past studies. It might not be directly related to your study. You're just trying to say, hey, this has been done by someone else in a different field, similar to aviation. It's medical field, but it's a similar concept, right? Conceptually, it's the same concept. Impact of a web-based interactive simulation game on nursing students' experience and performance in life support training, right? So they're saying, okay, what is the effect of simulation or a simulator on experience and performance, right? That's the overall topic. And so that's similar to my overall topic as well. So I can link their results and their study performance and the way they did it and do a very similar thing, hopefully, maybe with a few changes, to aviation. So that's how we do our literature review. So what I want you to do is to find some articles associated with a topic that you choose, because ultimately you're going to boil down to one topic. So that's my goal for this next week, or over 2 weeks. You can do as much literature review as you like, but the minimum is I'm going to make it 4. I want you to find 4 articles that are directly related to your topic that you want to pursue. If you're not sure yet, then choose 2 of the topics and kind of do 3 and 3 or 2 and 2 until you get a little bit more. Actually, no, 3 and 3, and then go from there and try and decide which direction you want to go, because you'll eventually need at least 4 at the end of the day, at the end of the project, to complete the exercise. So you want to have as much literature as you can associated with it. Then you're going to work on this literature review assignment. So here's one that I've done before. I found an article that was called Puzzle Assembly Training, Real World versus Virtual Environments. So kind of getting a virtual reality link to the purpose of the study that I'm doing. So the purpose of the study from this literature review is the purpose of the research that's above there. Examine the use of virtual reality training environments versus actual training environments to solve a puzzle. And it examined two groups, different sizes. One group was given a simulator training environment. The other group was given actual life training before the actual test, right? Then they were both tested again at a later date to examine performance. So this is summarizing what happened there in your own words, just so that it's clear to the reader and clear to yourself as to what happened and how they did it and what they did. The methods that they did was they did an experiment methodology, two groups, kind of like the one I showed you with the nursing one and the simulator right there, and the previous few examples up on Google Scholar and stuff like that. And I kind of made this up because I didn't get around to the full thing. So they used a simulator, and with the experiment group, control group was given an actual training session. Both participant groups were timed in the training environment and were timed for completion. So the variables that they looked at was time for performance, and then looking at to see how they did. And they were given the actual test of assembly, and then they were timed for the actual completion. Then the two groups times to completion were statistically examined for differences. And what they found in the overall results, so I'm kind of explaining the overall results, took 3 times as long in the training environment to put the puzzle together, but tested to be 3 times faster at assembling the puzzle in the actual testing phase. So while the simulator training took longer to physically do because it's a virtual reality environment, once they got into the actual reality testing phase, the group that got the training with the simulator rather than something else were able to do it faster, and they were also found to be more proficient later in testing, later down the line over time. And so the link of the study, and then you have to be able to link it. The topic of the current study of interest, you got to be clear that it's your study, is to investigate the effect of simulators in UAV training and how it may improve performance in pilots who utilize simulation. This study, this previous study, demonstrates that simulators adequate and effective training, right? And so that's how you're linking it. You're saying that your current study of interest is to do XYZ, and the previous study, this previous study that you just looked at, this literature review that you just looked at, demonstrates that simulators can provide adequate and effective training. So you're trying to show that, hey, there is a link from the study that I just examined and how it's related to my topic of interest. So that's the literature review, and your goal is to do that at least 4 to 5 times. Try and find as many as you can that are related to the topic of your choice so that you can narrow it down to one. Okay? Good luck.